Hello students, welcome back. Now we are dealing with the first rule of the comma. So mastering commas on the SAT. Before we go on to rule 1, we need to understand a basic mistake that is committed when we use comma in an improper way. Let's take this sentence. These are called run-on sentences. A run-on sentence is basically an incorrect sentence which is formed by punctuating in the middle of a sentence. A run-on sentence is basically an incorrect sentence which is formed by incorrect uses of punctuation. So let's look at an example. I love to write papers. I would write one every day if I had time. These are two independent clauses. Sentence 1, I love to write papers. Sentence 2, I would write one every day if I had time. You cannot punctuate between these two using a comma, simply because these are two independent clauses, and by rule, a comma cannot demarcate two independent clauses. The comma has to demarcate either an independent and a dependent clause or a dependent and an independent clause. So, if I write a sentence like this, participants could leave the study time anytime, anytime they needed to indicate their preference, something like that, while both of them are independent clauses, and if I demarcate them by using a comma, this is basically called a comma splice error. So a comma splice error is when two independent clauses are demarcated by the use of a comma. That's an error. That's a comma splice error. So that would lead us to our section or tip 1, which would be the punctuation tip 1, that commas should only link dependent clauses to independent clauses. Commas should only link dependent clauses to independent clauses. The council's plans will never be carried out, comma. There is too much opposition, incorrect, because both of them are independent clauses, and hence this cannot be written with a comma to demarcate them. The correct use could be a full stop or even a semicolon if needed. So there are two corrections, either a semicolon, or we can also treat it like that we can turn the second part into a dependent clause by using a conjunction, either of the conjunctions between the two independent clauses, to turn the second one into a dependent clause. Nutshell, comma rule 1 says that a comma has to be between an independent and a dependent clause, or a dependent and an independent clause. Comma rule 1 says that if you use a comma between two independent clauses, this is called a comma splice error. And so this is an error. This is the nutshell of comma rule 1. So let's look at some manifestations. Manifestations are opening phrase. The opening phrase has to be separated with the main clause using a comma. So the incorrect part out here is, while they were once endangered by commercial whaling, obviously there has to be a punctuation somewhere here. Humpback whale populations have recently grown at a rapid rate. So obvious there is a comma out here, and obviously you can see that the first part is a dependent part out here, or called the opening phrase, and the second one, humpback whale populations have recently grown at a rapid rate, is the independent clause out here. So let's do some examples. I walked into the drugstore and requested the latest medication. The clerk had to look in the back. Now, as you can see, very obvious and evident that both of these are independent clauses. So this is an independent clause, and again this is an independent clause, and use of a comma is incorrect. So let's see if we are able to, yes, definitely we can use a semicolon, right? The latest medication, which the clerk had to. Now, because we have used a which out here, the second part becomes a dependent clause. the second part becomes a dependent clause. Obviously, you can understand that this is a conjunction. This is a conjunction. Hence, we have used this conjunction to turn the second part into a dependent clause, and hence a semicolon will be incorrect, because now this is a dependent clause and this is an independent clause, and a semicolon cannot work between an independent and a dependent clause. So A is definitely not the correct answer. The latest medication, comma, which the clerk would have to look. This is grammatically incorrect, so definitely B is incorrect. The latest medication, comma, the clerk had to look in the back, something like that. I don't know. This is again looks very unlikely. The latest medication, full stop. Definitely two independent clauses can be demarcated by a full stop. The best answer for me, I guess, is D. So let's check that. Yeah, definitely. D is the best option, simplest option. SAT would not take these kinds of sentences or these kinds of complicated sentences. Whenever we have a complicated sentence on the SAT, always the simplest or the most concise one with the less words, right, would always stand. So we'll do that when we do the wordiness. So the correct answer to this one is D. So what about this one? Take barlett pears, for instance. Unless they are treated with the right amount of 1 MCP at exactly the right time, they will remain hard and green until they rot, and consumers who experience this will be unlikely to purchase them again. So this part, obviously, we are discounting this part, the meaning of this part. We are concentrating, focusing on the underlined portion. Take barlett pears, for instance. Now, definitely, the second part, as we can see, is also an independent clause unless they are treated with the same amount of 1 MCP and all those things. This is an independent clause, and this is definitely an independent clause. Take barlett pears, for instance. So the idea behind the whole story is that we definitely cannot put a comma out here for two reasons. One, if we put a comma to start with and to end with, this becomes a non-restrictive clause, and hence this becomes incorrect. So A is definitely incorrect. Now let's take this one. Take barlett pears, for instance, with a colon. Colon can definitely be used after an independent clause. Looks to be okay. Barlett pears, for instance, full stop, without a comma out here. Very difficult for this one to stand, because take barlett pears, for instance, is definitely needs a punctuation before that. So looks like incorrect. And barlett pears, for instance, again, this is a capitalization. So the most probable answer is a B. So we work out the SAT examples like this, going by the tips. So comma splices and how to fix them. Yeah, of course, the most common way of fixing the comma splice is to use a coordinating conjunction. So if you use a conjunction plus an independent clause at the end, right? So a sentence wherein you have got an independent clause and an independent clause, and you put a conjunction in the middle, this becomes a dependent clause, and hence obviously this becomes an ID combination, and hence this stands. So let's take an example. Let's take an example and see how it goes. Just a minute. Okay. So Anna Robertson, Moses only began painting at the age of 78, but right. So again, a fanboy conjunction, a coordinating conjunction. So I'm quite sure that this is correct. Replace the comma with a period or semicolon. Obvious. If there are two independent clauses, the only punctuations we can use between two independent clauses is either a semicolon or a period, right? So we can replace the comma either with a period or a full stop or a semicolon. That goes without saying. So these are some examples. Anna Robertson Moses only began painting at the age of 78, semicolon. She achieved fame as an artist, began painting at the age of 78, nevertheless, comma. Okay, now this is a special case. We are going to deal with this when we do the semicolon. This has got to do with an adverb as a conjunction. So We have done that when we started with the conjunction at 1.13. You can refer back to 1.13, wherein we have dealt with the conjunction. We have done that, but then we are going to take this in details, the serial semicolons, when we do the semicolon part. So let's leave it as of now. Anna Robertson only began painting at the age of 78, full stop. Yeah, of course, this is definitely another option in place of a semicolon, depends on how you want to write it. However, again, comma, the same thing. Again, we have got an adverb as a conjunction. Same, you can refer back to 1.13, but then we are going to take this up. The third way in which we can impress upon this is something like this. Anna Robertson Moses began painting at the age of 78, achieving. So we can use a subordinating conjunction. Either ways, any of these conjunction will work, because the second part will be turned into a dependent clause, and we can also use a participle to start with. Although Anna Robertson Moses began painting at the age of 78. Now this turns the first part into a dependent clause, and the second part remains an independent clause. So either ways, either of the parts of a sentence has to be turned into a dependent clause, and one has to remain an independent clause to put a comma in between to avoid the comma splice error. This is a tip. You can have a look at that, and then we can continue. So nutshell of the whole sentence, of the whole rule number 1 or tip number 1 is that tip number 1 for comma would state, that we can use a comma between an independent and a dependent clause, dependent and an independent clause, never between an independent and an independent clause. So that is the nutshell of the whole rule. Stay tuned for rules 2 and 3 in the next section.